Greetings, adventurers. My name is Kramer, and this is a rant about all of my thoughts on the Netflix Witcherverse, and it is going to be a long one, so strap in, make some popcorn, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. So I like The Witcher, but it is not like Lord of the Rings. It does not always get a pass. It is not beyond my criticism, and we are about to experience a whole ton of my criticism for this. I'm excited for The Witcher Season 2. I was hyped for the cartoon, and then sadly disappointed by the cartoon that came out earlier, but you know, it was still entertaining, but that's fine. My girlfriend is now playing The Witcher 3 for the first time, and I'm currently making my armor. In fact, here, I'm gonna give you a sneak peek of the breastplate that I'm making for myself. That's gonna sit right there and then wrap around my whole body. But I don't know how well the camera will pick up the details. It's not dyed or anything yet. It's barely even stitched, but yeah, there we go. It's made out of some pretty thick leather that I'm gonna bake harden. So there will be a video on that. Stay tuned. But I want to start off by saying that this is not a comment on the showrunners or the producers or any member of the production team. I do not question their passion or their dedication to the project. I proceed with the idea or the frame of mind that any thought or criticism that I have has already been thought through by members of the production team and was then dismissed for a logical reason that I simply haven't considered because I'm not a member of the production team. So I'm not trying to assert that I'm smarter or that I know better than anybody else. That being said, there are some choices that I disagree with, to put it lightly, so while what I'm saying might sound a little harsh, I just want to remind everyone that I'm not attempting to insult the integrity of any of the people involved, no matter how passionately or hyperbolically I speak. So a lot of thought and passion clearly went into the production of The Witcher show, and as an outsider to the production, but an insider as an actor myself, my hypothesis is that there are artistic miscommunications between team members, some budgetary issues, which I think should be solved in Season 2, and also a fundamental misunderstanding of how accepted fantasy worlds are built and expected to be seen. It seems that a number of things which should have been considered from a production standpoint were, but many of these problems, while considered logically, for whatever reason, their execution was lacking, again, in my opinion. There are things that I like. I don't hate The Witcher. I like Henry Cavill, you know? Everyone really seems to be proud of the work they're doing, and I think they should be. Like, for instance, Todd Cutler from Todd's Workshop made Geralt's swords for the show. I think that's really cool, but I had to find out about that, though, from Todd's own YouTube channel. Like, why isn't Netflix capitalizing on the fact that they have all of these master craftsmen from the historical community working on this show as a huge selling point? Many weapons from the Witcher show were designed with purpose in mind, made by real craftsmen, but in the final cut of the show, we are never allowed to actually appreciate this. For example, Geralt's swords are literally never actually introduced, but the Witcher swords are like integral. They should essentially be their own characters, but they don't even tell us which one is the silver one and which one is the meteorite one. It's all just implicit. You're just supposed to infer which one is which. Like, I didn't even know that one of them was meteorite. I thought it was silver and steel. Add to this the fact that in the games, all of Geralt's steel swords have a straight crossguard, and all of Geralt's silver swords have a angular crossguard, but it's reversed in the show, and it's never ever mentioned. And I can't be the only person who had this confusion, because when you search for Geralt's silver sword online, a number of pictures are of his steel sword, not his silver one. These swords were designed specifically for Henry Cavill so that he could perform all his own stunts. Henry Cavill is Geralt, which means in world, these swords were designed specifically for Geralt's fighting style. Why is this never mentioned? That ended up being a negative anyway. I'm a scumbag. Costume design. For me, the costume design takes time periods that are too far away from the late Middle Ages to be believable as a technology gap. I think there's a set number of years that you can pull from to be anachronistic, and then past that, things start looking really out of place. There are designs that could be used to denote an ethereal or magical, otherworldly quality without looking like Lady Gaga or the Hunger Games. And the costumer for the show has said himself that for the first season, I believe it's a different costumer for the second season, but he said that he was taking inspiration from high fashion. And in that regard, I think he did a really good job. I just personally really don't think it fits the world. So a piece looking interesting or having a really nice texture, even a piece that has some historical precedent to it, can still look out of place, especially if it doesn't seem to have an intended purpose to begin with. Retroactive explanations for design choices never work as well as being shown why an artistic decision was made in the story. So little details here and there are fine, they're awesome when you find them, but the answer for why anything exists should never be, well, we thought it looked cool, and it's up to the viewer to decide what the history for a certain piece in the story is. Even if there is a practical reason why something looks the way it does, if it's never explained, essentially what that's saying is that there is no lore to be discovered here. You just have to make it up. World building is often compared to an iceberg, with good world building appearing to have much more to it than we actually see. But if we don't ever really get the chance to see any of these pieces and be shown that there are elements about them that we should appreciate, it ultimately doesn't even matter that they were included in the first place. The lore of the story shouldn't be an Easter egg. So let's take the Nilfgaard armor, for example. I know everyone ragged on it. Yes, it looks bad, but I want to go deeper with that. The Nilfgaard armor was designed logically, but poorly executed. They wanted to show that Nilfgaard wasn't at the height of its power yet. They were an army based off of conscription with no real finance or anything. That's what the showrunners have said. But one, this was told to us in interviews by the writers after the fact, and two, that part of the lore is literally never directly addressed in the show itself. And it also raises a number of questions, like why does an army based off of conscription not levy super heavy taxes on its people so that it can afford to equip its army with the best that it can afford? Or are we just supposed to assume that that's exactly what happened and this is what we came up with? What even is this material? If they were such a poor army, how are they even able to defeat Sintra in the first place? A far more, not necessarily technologically advanced, but certainly more economically stable country at that period in time. Like, are the generals geniuses? I don't know, it's never explained. Do they have superior tactics or overwhelming numbers? I don't know, it's never explained. Are their fighters just way better trained? I don't know, it's never explained. Do they have a different fighting style that the Cintrans just weren't equipped to handle at that point? Like, if the Cintrans only fought on foot and all of a sudden they were trying to fight cavalry, that would make sense, but we don't see that. Instead, the only battle we see is just two large groups of people charging at each other. I don't know, and it's never explained. So even if they told us all of this, and then they explained what the armor was and why it looked like it does, like it was some plentiful breed of reptile creature that is native to Nilfgaard, and they farmed it for its leather and mass-produced the armor, and it looks like the way it does, and it's all wrinkly and terrible because they had to mass-produce it and they didn't care. None of that matters because the design of the armor still looks bad. It looks too modern to be believable. The guys look like they're just wearing riot gear, and the material looks otherworldly besides. It makes it look like the characters aren't human, which they are. The entire thing is just incredibly confused. Let's take the orcs from The Lord of the Rings as an example. They are a utilitarian, warlike people. They breed their own army, and they never retreat. The Uruk-hai don't have armor on their backs to reflect this part of their culture. Their armor is rough, cobbled together, but it looks freaking awesome. It doesn't look out of place at all. Their weapons are made for hacking people to bits, and the shape and the roughness and the finish denotes that this is a warlike people that cares nothing for the aesthetics of their weapons, only that they function. It is a sharp, heavy piece of metal, and it gets the job done. The Nilfgaardian armor doesn't tell us anything about who they are as a people from a viewing perspective, but the design itself is also so interesting and frankly bizarre that it just leaves the viewer wondering what the story is attempting to tell us. There is little to no discernible distinction between nations or regions because of costume design. Who is at Calanthe's court? I know Skelegans were there because they told us. I know Crack-on-Crate was there because they told us, so I can only assume that the people that were sitting with Crack-on-Crate were also Skelegans, but they don't look any different from anybody else. But you have these guys that are wearing furs. Who were they? I can't just make up backstories for people, and the fact that they're there means that they must have come from somewhere. So instead of making the world feel bigger, I'm just confused as to what I'm seeing, and as a fan of the game, someone coming from the games, which I'm sure many people for the show were, I'm left wondering if these people wearing furs aren't Skelegans, why aren't they? Why is Crack-on-Crate dressed like a Cintran? Is this even Cintran clothing? Do Skelegans and Cintrans have different clothing in this world? If he is wearing Cintran clothing and not Skelegan clothing to impress the Cintran court during this ball, how does he feel about that? How do any of the Skelligans feel about that? Who are these people? The world is huge and the continent is full of factions and I have no idea how to tell anybody apart. I'm taking this off because I think the leather sound is getting into the microphone. This leads us to the overarching theme that I think the setting is confused. While I didn't find the actual plot of the show hard to follow, and that doesn't mean that I didn't have some issues with the plot, but that's a completely different topic, what I had trouble with was telling literally where we were. Not where in the timeline, actually, physically where things took place. Lots of the sets just felt like tiny individual rooms where scenes happened to be happening, and rather than pieces of a puzzle that all fit together to paint the picture of a larger world. We had establishing shots of places with some really interesting, intriguing looking architecture, but it's never really expounded upon. But I also have no idea what part of the continent we're on to begin with, so it's irrelevant. The designers wanted to make the world feel as if it's much older than the people that are currently living on it, and that it was here before and we are simply discovering that. And I completely agree with this approach. But because the architecture is so varied, and I don't have a baseline for the architectural style of the buildings built by the current factions, and sometimes those aren't even established in the first place, I have no idea what I'm even looking at. It was like the design team of the show got so excited, and that's good. I want them to be excited. I want them to be passionate. This is not destructive criticism, or at least I hope it isn't taken that way. But they got so worried about the specifics of how many rocks are gonna go here, like what texture should this blade have or something. But also that people sort of neglected to realize that the individual stylistic choices, however much passion they put into all of these individual puzzle pieces, at the end of the day, it all has to fit together at the end and look like a full thing. And instead, we got all of these nice, cool individual pieces, but instead, can you imagine if the Tower of Sauron looked nothing like the rest of the Mordor architecture because someone took it and they were like, oh, cool, I get to do Sauron's tower here. I could do whatever I want. I have full artistic freedom. And then they just do anything and they're like, this is how I think it should look. And then everyone's like, okay, great. And then they just composite it into the video and it's blue and it doesn't fit anything else, but it looks really interesting, doesn't it? The very existence of objects is not enough, especially when it's not explained explicitly in the show. It's this is this, and this is why this is this. You can't just show us this, and not even in the script have an idea of what it is. It's well, we just made it, and we wanted to show it, we wanted it to look interesting. It's wanting the show to look interesting is not as good as actually having the show be interesting. When the Fellowship rides down the river and finds the Argonath, we see this stunning visual. It's clearly ancient, it's enormous, and it's surrounded by ruins on the shore. But Aragorn explains to us that this was built by his forefathers, by an older generation from a different bygone age. We aren't just left wondering, oh, those statues were interesting, I wonder what those were, maybe I'll make up my own history for them. And the more I think about it, the more it really seems like certain elements of this world weren't planned at all, and they were literally just there to be visually captivating and provide the illusion that there was more to this world than there actually is. Which almost seems like an insult, but that's definitely what happens in most things. For some reason, it's just more obvious here. So there's no distinction between factions or regions of the continent with architecture, and there's also no difference between factions or regions with costume design. There's no distinction between the accents that they use. They all sound relatively similar, except for some of the ones that just randomly don't, but because I can't tell who they are anyway, it doesn't tell me anything about who they are or where they came from. It's just oh, this person happens to have an accent. From The Nightmare of the Wolf, the Witcher cartoon, if you haven't seen it. Why does Declan have a Scottish accent when it's been already established that dwarves in this world also have a Scottish accent? What native language caused him to have this accent? Accents aren't just random inborn traits. They aren't personalities. There must be a reason for him to have this accent. And if there is a reason, it can't just be a footnote in the script. The audience actually has to know what it is. Where is this guy from? It's just random, though. This is setting aside the fact that young Vesemir from the cartoon sounds nothing like the actor that's going to play him later in the show next season, and yet they're supposed supposed to be the same person from a continuous universe. There are not establishing shots of the world as a living, breathing place with people in it that live there and have lives. Like in Hobbiton, we get story, character introduction, and the culture and lifestyle of the hobbits all at once. And they establish a musical theme. In Bree, we get story, character development, and relationships, as well as our introduction to the big, scary world of men from the hobbit's perspective, all at once. We get the fires of industry in Isengard. We get to see what the orcs are, what they do, and who they are as a people. Rohan and Gondor are both kingdoms falling to ruin because of lack of leadership, but they both have their own distinctive architecture, costume design. They each even have their own musical theme to denote not only who they are as a people, but what we're supposed to think about them. I have no idea what Blaviken looked like or where it even was on the continent. Blaviken also didn't have its own individual theme, which is a real shame because even though we will likely never visit Blaviken again, if Blaviken had a theme that was catchy, that told us what Blaviken was, that told us the story of what happened at Blaviken, one, it could have been used as foreshadowing in the first episode as we get hints of that musical theme throughout the entire episode until we hear the final evolution, the final version of the song during the last fight. And then after that episode, the Blaviken theme could be used as a callback for Geralt every time he had to relearn the lesson about choosing the lesser evil. The Blaviken theme could play. Music from this show was unmemorable to me. Music from an epic fantasy must be more than just a nice backtrack to scenes. The Witcher games had this to a lot of an extent. Game of Thrones did to some extent, Lord of the Rings mastered this, even Naruto had this figured out. Like, music is used to tell a story and elicit planned emotional responses from the audience. Real quick, let's just analyze the names of the songs from The Witcher Season 1 and compare them to the names of songs from the game and from Lord of the Rings. The song about hobbits is called Concerning Hobbits. It is the Shire theme. We associate it with hobbits. It is planned this way. It is brilliant. And it makes its way into anything that Frodo does, especially when he or any of the other hobbits are going through some sort of hardship or thinking of home or remembering what it is that they're fighting for. Concerning Hobbits makes its way into the soundtrack in some form. The Fields of Ard Skellig or Kaer Morhen are themes of those places, and they play in those places, and they create atmosphere for those places, and they remind us of those places when they're being played anywhere else, which is very rarely. And over time, this triggers an emotional response, like Pavlov's dogs, and it can be used with brilliant effect at any point in the story to make us care about a given scene, because we start associating feelings not just with the characters, not just what the characters are going through at this point in the story, but also the song itself, and we start ascribing feelings to that song, so they can just play the song, and we'll feel how we're supposed to feel in this, and it all just comes together, and it's brilliant. What is Yennefer's theme in the show? What is Sintra's theme? What are those plays? What does Ciri sound like to you? Like, if I asked you to sing the Rohan theme, you probably could. Da 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 da. What is Sintra's theme? The names of the songs. We're doing an analysis, lest I forget because I'm ranting. The names of the songs from the first season, I had them written down. In comparison to the names from the songs that I just previously mentioned, which were names of places and people about certain things, I'm gonna name these songs and you're not even gonna know that these are names of songs. They are alive. Late Wee Pups Don't Get to Bark. Do You Actually Have What It Takes? Those are the literal names of tracks from the Season 1 of The Witcher. Not only can you not tell me what any of those songs sound like, but did you notice what the names of the songs were? They're beats in the story, they're points in the story. They're names of scenes from the show, which means that probably how this was done was instead of like they did for Lord of the Rings, where Howard Shore just composed Lord of the Rings just as music, they sent whoever was composing a list of the scenes or snippets from the scenes or the script, and then they said, we want underscoring here. And then whoever was writing the music just wrote individual songs for each one of those scenes, which means all of those songs are tied specifically to each one of those scenes and can't really be pulled and placed anywhere else like you could with Concerning Hobbits, which means that we can't develop an emotional connection to the music. It's just a fancy little layer. It's unobtrusive, it doesn't hurt the show, but it doesn't really help it either. And this was especially astounding going back to the cartoon because they used different music for the cartoon as well, probably because they just, again, wrote music specifically to the cartoon scenes and not just music as a whole. Like, I understand that it's art and everything is subjective, but I really think there's like a proper way to do this, especially given the fantastic precedent set by other fantasy movies. Like Harry Potter has a theme, Pirates of the Caribbean has a theme, Star Wars has a theme, Lord of the Rings has a theme. The only memorable part of music from The Witcher TV show is like what plays during the opening like title crawl. It would have been so much better if they had written Sintra's theme, and then Sintra's theme plays at parts where it makes sense in the story, or they wrote a theme specifically for Ciri, and that plays at specific parts. But I rewatched the first episode, and what happens when Nilfgaard is sacking Sintra, Ciri's running away in the tunnels, and again, spoiler alert, Queen Calanthe commits suicide. What plays? Not Sintra's theme, not Calanthe's theme, not Ciri's theme. The show's theme plays. Geralt's theme plays. The da-da-da-da-da. That plays. Why does that play? Why not have Sintra's theme eventually morph into Ciri's theme and have... after Sintra falls, we pretty much never hear the Sintra theme again, but it lives on in Ciri's theme because she's the only one left. God! Anyway, I was talking about the cartoon. They don't use the same music, and then the ending credits, when they finally reveal, again, spoiler, oh, all the people that escaped, the little bald boy is Geralt, and then the credits roll, they almost played Geralt's theme. The only memorable theme from the TV show. They almost played it, but they didn't. It was different, and it was weird. Okay, so let's talk about casting, and not the casting that everyone has an issue with, because I had those issues too, but casting in terms of helping tell the story of the world. I have an issue with this. Casting people with dwarfism as dwarves leaves a strange gap in the human genome, and this is not at all a PC thing. Just bear with me, you will agree with me because I am objectively correct. People with dwarfism aren't a different species, and we as the viewer know and understand that. Like, I understand that it might have been a budgeting thing, or just a VFX problem that they had, or they just wanted to cast people with dwarfism as dwarves, but it's just an odd choice from every perspective. The proportions of a human with dwarfism to an actual fantasy dwarf as members of the community, like fans of the genre, have come to understand dwarves is not the same, for one. But most strikingly, what does this mean for characters that actually have dwarfism? Do no human beings in this world suffer from this genetic anomaly? Are dwarves in this world just literally humans that have dwarfism? Like, who is going to play the halflings and the gnomes? They're not fantasy enough, if that makes sense, and they're already something that exists in the real world. It doesn't work. And people are going to be mad at me, probably for saying that, and also for this, but frankly, I really don't care. This is a rant, and I'm also right. The various factions of this world need to have something that distinguishes them from all of the others. The elves have ears, so that's fine. We can identify who they are. They're a different species. They have the pointed ears. Fine. The dwarves are short, that's fine. We can tell who they are, at least until we start introducing various other short races, then we're in trouble. But every human faction looks like all the other human factions. If they're close to the same, or at least varied without any link to a particular culture, as we've already established, and their accents are all the same, or at least varied with no particular link to any culture, as we've already established, and they also all look physically completely different. How in the world am I supposed to tell who is who, where they're from, and what their relationships are to each other? All the people from Sintra are incredibly diverse, and all of the people from Nilfgaard are incredibly diverse, and every town that we see, no matter where we are on the continent, if that's even told to us in the first place, are either incredibly diverse, or there is no way of knowing where we are anyway. This makes no sense. No one has a distinct culture or nationality. Why? But yes, I know the answer is politics. You can't on the one hand say that the Witcher continent is an incredibly diverse group of people and then have them all act and look completely identical. If you want a diverse culture with people that all look different, that's fine. You know, like, it's your story, I guess. You can't, like, okay. This is a rant. On the one hand, you can't, like, claim that you're adapting a thing faithfully and then, like, use that as your defense when people have issues with your artistic decisions. And then also, on the other hand, just, like, do whatever the hell you want and go against the lore of the story and say, well, this is my telling of it. Like, you can't have both. Anyway, but... If you want a diverse culture with the people all looking different, they should all wear similar clothing, the same clothing that ties them to a specific culture and a specific location, and they should all speak with the same accent. And only those people should have that accent, or a musical theme, or something, anything to differentiate these groups of people. I have no idea who anybody is, or how they relate to anybody else, or how they freaking got there in the first place. Marketing. Marketing for the show seems to be like it's on a completely different planet than the rest of the world is. Catering to newer audience members, casual audience members that don't know anything about the Witcher world, rather than focusing on the fan base, not just of The Witcher, but of fantasy in general that already exists. The inclusion of modern music in the trailer, God, we'll get to that in a second, or modern jokes or anything like that, it always shatters the immersion of the world and keeps us from being invested, and instead it directly undercuts the rest of the world that the TV show is already struggling to maintain. Like, remember when Ed Sheeran was in Game of Thrones and then everyone like face palmed or threw their TV out the window? Or after some episodes, spoiler alert, when Jaime Lannister gets his hand cut off, instead of playing thematic music for Game of Thrones, it just goes straight into like a modern song. Like, what the hell was that? So, what? What on this heavenly green earth made someone think that a rap song was what the people were desperately pining for The Witcher Season 2 trailer? And I think probably it's because they're trying to make it seem more like an action film, which it isn't. They're trying to pander and draw more people in from a wider audience to get more people to watch it. But that is such a huge mistake. That's like the biggest problem. It's the one Star Wars made, and it's why Star Wars is like now just practically a dead franchise at this point. Like, oh my God, never do this again. If modern music makes its way into Season 2, I don't know what I'm going to do, but whatever it is, it's going to be entertaining. And if you want to see The Witcher Season 2 trailer with the music that it should have had, you can click on this link up here. I'm glad whoever that is made it, because if they didn't, I was gonna. Some fantasy or period pieces can get away with using modern music. Peaky Blinders does it. There's a Marie Antoinette movie that does it, but those are period historical pieces where the history or the world is kind of just the setting, and you could pick that story and you could pick those characters up and put them anywhere else, and the way they interact with each other and the story that they tell will change very little. The Witcher is not structured that way. I mean, you could change the setting of The Witcher. You could make it cyberpunk or film noir or whatever, as I've seen at least some fan art do. You could do that, but you still need to have the music match the world, because the way that the story is told, the way that the characters interact with not just with each other, but with the world itself. The world is a living, breathing character for this. It's not just the setting. The setting and the characters and how everything interacts with the story is predicated on all of those things being one cohesive, believable world. It seems to me like they were trying to appeal to far too many people at once. They wanted to take their time and tell the deep story of the books. Lauren Schmidt has said that she thinks that modern TV audiences are very intelligent nowadays, and I completely agree, and that she can use that to her advantage, and I think that that's true, but I think it's because we have these whole communities that love specific stories and specific worlds and really invest in the characters and do deep dives into the lore. That's why we have people that are so intelligent like that. So the show is now divided between trying to take its time telling and planting the seeds of this tri-story between Geralt and Ciri and Yennefer, but the show is also too afraid to actually take the time it needs for those seeds to germinate. And instead, we end up with these really short mentions of things from the deep lore, or not even, just surface level lore. Like, what the Law of Surprise is not deep lore, but it's like explained so poorly in the show because they just wanted to like get it over with and then get on to the next thing quickly. The audience we might lose audience retention if we actually just tell the story that we're trying to tell. I think they would have been much better off if they just committed to it and took the time that they needed. Season 1 could have been told in 2 seasons, or at least Season 1 and the first couple episodes of Season 2. And I think this is a trap that a lot of newer dungeon masters run into as well. They aren't confident in the story they're telling, so they end up trying to hide the plot instead to make it seem more interesting. The plot is fairly predictable. It's just that they don't tell you what the plot is, so it creates a mystery, but an annoying mystery. In order to try to build the world and make it seem more interesting, they'll like go into really intricate detail, like describing like this vase that's on the countertop, or like they'll go into really intricate detail about like, oh, and like the woodwork on this bookshelf is immaculately carved, and it's like, okay, The DM is the director of this story, and he's telling me this. He must be telling it to me for a reason other than that just like, oh, it's interesting. Like, is it important to me? Am I supposed to know this? Am I supposed to take stock of this? Is it saying something other than that? There is a bookshelf here. Look at the world that I've created. Like, they wanted Era 2s to like look magical and like, oh, what is this architecture? Where did it come from? You're right, that's a good question. That's a good question, show. Where did it come from? Why is it shaped like this? Why is it built like this? Who built this? Is this Elvish architecture? Are we ever going to see other Elvish architecture that looks like this? If I see ruins, am I meant to assume that it's also Elven architecture? Like, why? Like, you can't just present questions like that and then not answer them. And maybe their plan is to answer them in the future, but like, on the one hand, I'm like harping on people for having short attention spans. And on the other hand, there's a way to introduce mystery into a show without making it feel like it's a mistake. What ends up happening is that any creativity and risk-telling in the story goes into elements that really don't need to be changed, like armor design, but then the story itself remains incredibly safe, as if a DM just said, you are in a tavern, and just left it at that. Like, it looks like a tavern, it sounds like a tavern, there's people drinking drinks, they're drinking tavern drinks, maybe they have an interesting name, there's people being rowdy, they're eating food, but it's a setting, and that's all it is, and even if they all have a different name, they all essentially look the same. There's your rhyme. That was a meta joke. I don't know, maybe they're afraid of pissing people off or having people be upset with the show or click off if things are moving too slowly. But if you try to please everyone, you're gonna end up pleasing no one. And I don't think that exactly happened here. Like, I wasn't displeased when I saw it. I really hope Season 2 is better. My fellow adventurers, this video was brought to you by the inner rage inside my heart and no small amount of caffeine. I will see you next week with another video, and in the meantime, I'd like to wish you good luck on your adventures.